Fair enough.
Great.
It's really good to see you again.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks again. Thank you again, Congressman Fattah, for your opening of this session. Really appreciate it, and I appreciate your words and insights. Joining me here on the stage are really three technology leaders and innovators that I think are probably familiar to many of you, but I'll introduce them briefly. What we're going to do in this session, just to make sure we're all on the same page, what we're going to do in this session after I introduce our speakers, is each is going to have approximately 10 minutes to make some remarks, and then the rest of the time we'll use in a Q&A session. And once again, the questions, if you have a question for any of the speakers here, jot it down on one of the index cards, and that question will come up to me. So starting on my right, on your left, we have an individual who needs a little introduction because he is, of course, the president of the AIAA, someone you're all very familiar with, Dr. Michael Griffin. He's a senior technology leader with extensive experience in government, industry, and academia. He's currently, of course, the AIAA president, but also the CEO of the Schaefer Corporation. And before joining Schaefer, he served as the 11th administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. He's also served as a professor of mechanical and aerospace engineering at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. He's served as head of the Space Department of the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory, president and chief operating officer of NQTEL, and in several positions with the Orbital Sciences Corporation. Seated next to him, just to my right, is Dr. Arthi Prabhakar. She's the director of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Arthi has spent her career investing in world-class engineers and scientists to create new technologies and businesses. Her first government service in national security was from 1986 to 1993, when she served as a DARPA program manager and office director. In 1993, President Clinton appointed her director of the National Institute of Technology, an organization with 3,000 people, where she worked with companies across multiple industries. Arthi moved to Silicon Valley in 1997 and served first as the Chief Technology Officer and then Senior Vice President at Raychem, and later as Vice President and then President of Interval Research. Most recently, from 2001 to 2011, she was a partner with U.S. Venture Partners, which is an early-stage venture capital firm. And then to my left is Dr. Michael Griffin. Mike is presently the Associate Administrator of the Space Technology Mission Directorate for NASA. And in that capacity, he manages and executes the space technology programs, developing and infusing advanced technology into the agency's exploration and science missions. Mike has over 25 years' experience in the design, development, and deployment of spaceflight systems. And previously, he served in headquarters positions of Deputy Chief Technologist and the Director for Space Technology. Prior to coming to NASA headquarters, Mike worked at NASA Langley, where he served as Deputy Director for Engineering. And prior to his NASA service, Dr. Griffin worked at the MIT Lincoln Laboratory and also in industry. As you can see, we have a very strong and well-rounded panel here with expertise in the government sector, in academia, and in industry. And I think I'll start with Dr. Griffin with his opening remarks.
Thanks, Bobby. Thanks for inviting me to join this panel and for moderating it yourself. This is a challenging area to discuss. Bobby asked us to talk for 5 to 10 minutes each. I could probably sit around and talk about this subject for half a day. Those of you out in the audience who know me well are sitting there saying, yeah, he could. But we won't do that. So Bobby asked me to talk about, spend a few minutes on a couple of different topics. The first one, creating and transitioning aerospace research and technology into future missions. And the second one, how do we do all that in today's legislative and milestone-driven climate? So let me try to spend a few minutes and share some, I guess, observations based on now almost 43 years of experience doing all this. And maybe it will be of some help to some of you with a little bit more runway ahead of you. In terms of creating and transitioning aerospace technology into future missions, I guess my very first point, the leading point, the main point, the one I would want you to go away with is this. You've got to know what mission you're going to apply it to. There has to be a mission. I personally, I won't deny the possibility of it, but I personally have never seen a substantive or significant technology development absent the driving requirements of a mission that someone has approved. Now that can be on a commercial basis, it can be public policy R&D, it can be a private-public partnership, it can be for DoD or civil, but I personally have not seen significant technology developments take place without the driving requirement of a specific task. It would be, pardon me, I think it would be nice if human beings were constructed psychologically such that we had the foresight to develop arrows in our quiver, if you will, sheafs of technology that would then be on the shelf when missions came along to need them. It would be nice. There are an awful lot of things about the psychology of human beings that would be nice if it were true. This is another one of those that's not. We human beings just do not act with sufficient foresight to create these building blocks and have them ready when needed. Rather, we develop them in response to a need. So if you are a technologist and you are trying to develop a technology that no one is saying they need, you are going to have a very hard row in front of you. So, second step, find a champion. Find a program which is or is about to be. Find a champion on that program, the highest level that you can find, and find as many such champions as you can obtain. Because if you are a technologist, you will need those people to raise their hands on your behalf and say, I need this technology if this mission is going to be worthwhile. Avoid the miracles in series challenge. Any aeronautics and space mission that we do in developmental engineering will have some technology challenges. If those technologies are to be successfully integrated and brought to the field, the mission itself will have to be successful. If the mission is not successful, the new technologies which support it cannot be successful. If you have too many new technologies on a given mission, in our business usually being done for the first time, too many new technologies is a death sentence. It is statistically almost certain that at least one of those will not make it to the launch pad or to the taxi stand, and if one of them doesn't make it, the whole batch goes down with it. It's far better in developing new technologies for aerospace programs to have one or two on a given mission and not try to put several in a row, one of which may fail. I don't mean to sound like a wet blanket, but I think there are times to husband your resources, and the introduction of new technologies onto flight programs is one of those times. Bear in mind that your technology is not the challenge. You probably know how to bring your technology to fruition, or you would not be raising your hand and trying to get it approved. The integration of your technology with the remainder of your flight vehicle or your ground system is the challenge. The integration of your technology is the challenge. I could say it a third time. By integration, I mean getting the answers to two key questions. What does your technology do to other systems on your flight vehicle that you didn't know that it was going to do and that you don't want it to do? What are the unintended consequences of your technology on other systems which also have to work? What sort of a mess does it make that you did not anticipate? Secondly, what happens to your technology, your new system in flight, because of the environment that it's in, both the man-made environment on your flight vehicle and the outside external environment? What happens to your technology in flight that did not happen to it on the ground and that you did not foresee because you were creating a new one-of-a-kind thing that never before existed in the history of the universe? So how good is your imagination? What happens to your system in flight that didn't happen to it in your lab? That's what I mean when I say integration is the challenge, and I have lost count of the number of times that the unanticipated consequences of a new technology in either direction, either from it or to it, have brought down an otherwise promising effort. Finally, Bobby asked me to talk about creating and transitioning aerospace research and technology into future missions, but I think that's too limited. As aerospace program managers and aerospace leaders, we need to transition other technologies that are not from aerospace into our missions. We are much the poorer in the quality of that which we produce if we do not recognize that many, many, many other engineering disciplines have neat things to offer that could be incorporated into aerospace missions, but will not be if we have our head down in front of us plowing our own furrow and are not noticing the larger landscape. So spin in. Spin in. Don't just think of aerospace as something which spins out to other areas. Look at other technology areas, other fields of endeavor as places from which we can get ideas as well. Now, how do we do all of this in today's legislative, budgetary, and milestone-driven climate? So I'm going to say again, link it to a mission that somebody wants. If somebody doesn't want what you are trying to do, it is going to be a very hard slog to get them to agree that they ought to want it. You can try, and there are some salesmen among us who are better than others. I was never very good. But you need to link what you're doing to what someone wants. When you're planning the roadmap for your technology development, whatever it is, try very hard to look at things from the point of view of, I'll say, programmatic authorities, program managers, institutional managers, military services, congressional funding agents. And when I say that, what are they looking for? Well, they're looking for a program which will produce deliverables in bite-sized chunks. I want to see a little progress. Okay, then I'll give you a little more money. I want to see a little more progress. Then I'll give you even more money. The very famous physicist and brilliant author Freeman Dyson once noted that human psychology is such that very little, if anything, ought to be planned, which takes more than 4 to 5 years to accomplish. Freeman thought that the human attention span was just insufficient to deal with programs that promised results on longer timescales than that, and in his book, Disturbing the Universe, he pointed out that even that was a bit of a stretch. So shorter is better, bite-sized chunks, milestone deliverables that people can see. Those who promise the future, their technology will be one of the future, and it will always be in the future. And I'll close by saying, promise what you can deliver and deliver what you promise. Don't offer a technology program that in order to get funding for it, and that was not very grammatical, I'm sorry, do not attempt in seeking funding for your program to promise that it will solve world hunger. First of all, you won't be believed, and if by chance you are believed and somebody offers the initial round of funding for it, you won't be able to deliver, and that will be the end of your story. Promise what you can deliver, deliver what you promise. Those would be tips that I would offer. Thank you, Bobby.
It's great to be here with all of you today, and I very much appreciated Congressman Fattah's remarks this morning about the broader context that we live in, and his kind words about DARPA and NASA and NIST and NSF as well. This panel represents a phenomenal amount of space expertise, so it's just a tremendous pleasure to be here with the two Mikes and with Bobby. What I wanted to do today is to talk about our focus at DARPA in reinventing national security space. But let me start at the beginning, which for those of us at DARPA, the beginning of our story is Sputnik. And occasionally I talk to audiences to whom I have to explain about Sputnik. I know I don't have to tell you about Sputnik. I'm sure many of you know that DARPA was started shortly after Sputnik. And that key triggering event is very much in my mind as I thought about what I wanted to speak with you all about here at AIAA for a couple of reasons, two reasons. The first has to do with the significance of that triggering event in the formation of DARPA 56 years ago now, because it's still critical in the way that we think about our mission at DARPA today. The agency was formed in 1958, partly because of the surprise of Sputnik, and we were created specifically to make sure that we prevented that kind of technological surprise in the future. Then, as now, we understood that technology was a cornerstone of our national security. We were pretty clear we didn't want to be in that kind of position yet again. And DARPA for 55 years now has focused on that mission of preventing technological surprise by creating some surprises of our own, and that's still very much the way we think about our mission today. And that mission of investing in making those pivotal early investments in the breakthrough technologies that change what's possible for national security, that's still very much our mission today. What we invest in changes from each period of time as the world changes, as technology changes. But today, as you look across the DARPA portfolio, you'll find that we're investing in hypersonics technology, in rethinking air dominance for the future. We're working on new ways to control the electromagnetic spectrum. When we think about the next generation of enabling technologies, we're investing in the opportunities as information scales to a dimension that we haven't really seen before, both in terms of new cyber opportunities, also new opportunities using big data analytics. And we're starting a new theme at DARPA in enabling technologies that builds on the opportunities that are present as biology becomes the basis for advanced technology. And that's work today that's represented in DARPA programs that span work in understanding how the brain functions, work in outpacing the spread of infectious disease, work in accelerating the development of synthetic biology. One part of our portfolio today is about rethinking national security space. And the reason for that, I think, is obvious, but I think it's worth stating, which is that in the 5 decades since Sputnik started humans' adventure in space, space has actually become something that is critically important to much of our lives. We all know about it in our personal lives. It's clearly important for how we understand the universe, how we understand our own Earth, weather forecasting, so many important civilian applications. But in the business of national security, space is also deeply critical to everything that we do. Today, we are extremely effective at waging a kind of precise, lethal war. It's something that is a core element of our national security today, but it is a kind of warfighting capability that's simply not possible without the assets that we have on orbit. Our ability to do navigation and guidance, communications, imaging, all of that has to be in place for us to be able to fight the kinds of wars that we today rely on as part of our national security capabilities. So it's critically important, something that we tend to take for granted because it has been a foundation for building our capabilities. But today we're at a juncture where the world is changing, and space is becoming increasingly congested as more and more commercial activity is taking place on orbit, and as other nations are staking their claims in space. That's what's happening around us in the national security world, but there's also something that's going on inside of the national security community in space that I think is actually quite troubling, and that has to do with how slow and how costly it is for us today to do anything that we need to do on orbit for national security purposes. We've gotten here for all good reasons, but when I look at where we are, it actually reminds me of many years ago. I used to live on a lake in Reston, and every winter when it got really cold, like last week for those of you who were here for that cold snap that we had, I would sit at my window and I would look out at the lake, and there would be these ducks that would sort of cluster at twilight, and they'd sit in the lake and they would stop moving, and the lake would start icing up around them, and eventually they would just freeze in place on this lake. And tragically, that's what it feels like to me when I think about where we are in terms of our ability to react and to do what we need to do quickly, cost effectively, in space for national security purposes. So, and that, in many ways, that brings me back to Sputnik, because yes, it was a surprise, but it was a surprise about space. I think we're in the middle of a self-inflicted surprise in some senses in space today. It's a very different kind of surprise, but it's one that is rendering us ineffective and putting us in a place that we simply cannot afford to be. So I think it's an important time to be thinking in fresh ways about how we break that paradigm. I want to share with you some thoughts and some work that we're doing at DARPA that I think will be important pieces of creating a very different future for space. And let me just mention three pieces of the puzzle. They have to do with launch cost and flexibility, satellite cost and flexibility, and with space domain awareness. And let me start with the launch piece of that. If you think about launch today, I think we've gotten used to this environment we live in which, even for a very small satellite, it can be tens of millions of dollars to get to orbit. It takes years to be able to schedule that. You're only able to go from fixed sites, a few fixed sites around the world. Today at DARPA, we're investing in programs that we hope will change that model and allow for the ability to launch on 24-hour call-up from anywhere around the world. Our ALASA program that I think many of you are involved in aims to be able to get a satellite to LEO, about 100 pounds to LEO for about $1 million. Our new experimental spaceplane program, XS-1, aims to develop a reusable first stage that enables a cost that's in the range of $5 million to get 3,000 to 5,000 pounds to LEO. Dramatic changes, not only because of the price that would be a revolution in capability, but also because of the flexibility and the rapid call-up. I think those are important new dimensions and new ways of thinking about launch. Now, the second piece of the puzzle is satellites, and today we being you all, you assemble and create these very complex systems here on the ground. We launch them, and when we get to orbit, what we've got is what we sent up. And it's a very inflexible capability in that regard. Our Phoenix program is working to create a future where, with space robotics technologies, we're able to service on orbit, we're able to assemble on orbit, we're able to reuse components perhaps on orbit. And as we develop those capabilities at GEO, we believe that we're going to start changing the fundamental dynamics and the economics of what's going to be possible in terms of satellite capability. So launch satellites. The third piece of the puzzle simply has to do with knowing what's going on orbit. And today, when we think about that, we still speak in terms of orbital catalog maintenance, and I think that term speaks volumes. Space is becoming an environment where the sheer number of objects is staggering. Space debris has become an increasing problem, and more fundamentally, space is becoming a real-time domain, and it's no longer good enough to just sort of know what's up there. We really need to start moving to a future of space traffic control, more like flight traffic control for the air domain, and that's a very different place than we are today. DARPA has a number of programs that are reaching towards that future. One piece of the puzzle, for example, is our Space Surveillance Telescope, which is able to see very dim objects at GEO across a very broad swath of the sky, a telescope capability that we have demonstrated in New Mexico, and we're now in the process of moving to Australia in cooperation with the Australian government. So I hope those give you some examples of the kinds of things that we're working on at DARPA, the technology capabilities that I think can change launch satellites themselves and our understanding of the space domain in real time. I think they're going to be essential elements of showing what's possible for the future. But in addition to changing the what we do, I think how we work in space and how we work together to achieve these new capabilities is equally important. DARPA has a long history of working with a broad technical community spanning universities, companies large and small, labs of all different sorts. But in the national security space environment, I think all of us in DoD have had a tendency to focus in a narrower fashion on the capabilities that we think are important for our missions. And I think today we're at a juncture where it's critically important that we find new ways of working more broadly with the civilian and commercial space communities. First, because we have shared interests, and secondly, because the challenges that we face, I think, are so significant that we're simply not going to get there any other way. So we look forward to exploring those kinds of new collaborative opportunities with many of you. Look forward to your ideas, which continue to fuel our next generation of thinking. And I'd be happy to speak about, answer your questions on any of those topics, space and otherwise. Thanks again for the chance to be here.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Bobby, for moderating this panel, and thank you to the speakers before me. It's always good. I always learn a lot. The Space Technology Mission Directorate was created by the Administrator Charlie Bolden just under a year ago. Our anniversary, 1-year anniversary, will be in February. And so I would ask, when we talk about a panel that's focused on federal investment of R&D, who would be so bold to try to create a new organization and a standalone technology program focused on research and development at this time and era? And for that answer, I would point you to some of the speakers we had here before you today. The continued support and vision and passion of Congressman Fattah has been instrumental in the creation and support of space technology, and of course, Dr. Braun, in his years here in Washington just a few years ago, to create Shetson Endeavor. Why do we need space technology at NASA? Why do we need a standalone technology program at the agency? You know, for those that have been with NASA for many years, and from what I can see from some of the color of the hair in the audience like mine, I can tell that some of you have been here for a while. So you know, and you've seen this movie before, a standalone technology organization at NASA. You know, we've actually looked at this and looked at lessons learned to try to see if we can break the cycle of that periodic standing and formation of technology and then its eventual dissolution and dissolving into other organizations in a mission-oriented agency. We think we've got those lessons learned. We think we have the answers that are necessary. We don't know yet if they're sufficient. Of course, with that, time will tell. When we look at the overall investment of R&D at the federal level, a recent report by AAS shows that R&D investments is fairly flat, maybe down 1%. I will say at NASA, it's up considerably from an investment in technology, part of which is this creation of the Mission Directorate, but there's more to it than that. If you look at where the agency is now, you can see that it's needed. It's needed by the agency and it's needed by the nation. If we're going to explore deep space beyond low Earth orbit, we know we need a heavy lift rocket. We know we need a human-rated capsule. But beyond that, we need a host of technologies, right, to allow us to enable to explore, to thrive in deep space. And how do we know this? Probably by many of you in this audience. In my office are 40 reports over the past 20 years. All say largely the same thing. What do we need to explore deep space? Propulsion, power, radiation protection, avionics, entry, descent, and landing. The list goes on. And so we've had studies, but not so much investment. And so that's where we stand today. That investment to enable the future missions, to make them effective, to enable them, to make them more affordable. The world has certainly changed since the Apollo mission. The reasons why, the technology why, the whole aerospace industry is considerably different than that time. Yet the challenge remains for us to explore deep space. But if you look at the history of technology development, it's really more than that. So certainly enabling missions is part of what we want to do at the end goal. As Mike kind of alluded to, at the end of the day, that's what we want to do. That's what we want to go explore. We need technology with a purpose. But we all know from the history of technology development, and if there's a great book on the AIAA labs on the history of the Bell Laboratory, which gave us the transistor, which gave the world the laser. And if you look at that, and any of the technology development stories that have really changed our lives, including a lot of the work at DARPA, you see that technology development, unfortunately, is nonlinear, it's discontinuous. It's hard to predict. If you look at the history of the transistor, it's actually hard to trace exactly who did what, when, and where, what the purpose was. They were trying to solve a problem, by the way. It just wasn't the problem that the transistor ended up solving. Likewise with the laser. So what do you do? How do you manage a program? And more importantly, how do you gain its advocacy in Washington, D.C. with the following aspects, right? It has a long-term vision. It's not very linear or predictable. It doesn't lend itself to linear roadmaps and here's what we're going to do and here's what I'm going to deliver to you in this day. Nor is it easy to traceable. And in a town that likes to take credit and wants to point to what they did, it's actually hard to go do that. So how do you develop and manage a program with those aspects? And it takes vision, and it takes vision of leaders, and like the Congressman Fatah, on what it takes to do R&D and federal investment, the long-term approach. Part of what space technology is about at NASA is not only developing the technologies that I'm going to show you here in a minute, just to give you some example of the types of things we're working on, but it's about building a community. We have really hard problems to go explore deep space, whether it be human exploration or robotic. In fact, it'll be and. But we have really hard problems, and we need the best and brightest minds to go solve those problems. So we need to reach out and build that bridge to the community, to the academic community, to line our investments with industry. And so we know for a long-term success, it's that bridge that we need to build for the future to get the best and brightest of this nation focused on the problems that we have at the agency. And that's one of the main aspects of the Space Technology Mission Directorate. We have over 400 activities with universities now. So after 30 years of operations of the shuttle, terrific vehicle, building the International Space Station with a heavy emphasis on operations and development, we now know we need to go rebuild that bridge with the academic and the industrial community to focus on the technologies that we need to go explore, and solve the problems we have of tomorrow. We don't only want to do this by ourselves. We also know that working with other government agencies, such as DARPA, and we were at December at the robotic trials. I actually have a picture of you with the NASA entry. Is important, right? And so right now we have over 43 activities with other government agencies, some big and some small, trying to leverage the dollar. We have many common problems with our other sister agencies. And so trying to combine those resources is essential. In the time now where the taxpayer dollar, of course, is always highly valued, but we want to do that as efficiently as possible. And there are many places where to align, and that's also where this community can help us align. It's in the technical community, in events such as this, that we can share results and share our visions and share our roadmaps of where we're making progress and where our tough challenges remain. Since we've been speaking now since 8 o'clock, I'd like to take just a quick pause, and I have a 2-minute little video that just gives some examples of the technologies we're developing at the Space Technology Program. Again, this program inspired by the Obama administration and its priorities for technical investment and investing in the innovation economy, as well as the need by the agency and the nation to explore deep space. One of those challenges is Mars. How we go to Mars, leveraging off just a little over a year ago when the Curiosity rover landed on the surface of Mars, a metric ton on the surface of the planet. To go and beyond there, we need a host of things. And so this is a little fast 2-minute clip. I'll warn you, I showed it to my wife, and she thought it was a little too fast and too many images at once. I showed it to my children, and they loved it. So be that as may, it's kind of a generational gap, so you're going to identify yourself. So, Jason, if I could have the movie.
2030s. I believe we can send humans to orbit Mars and return them safely to Earth. And landing on Mars will follow.
Just starting with a little history, not the entire history of solar exploration, as interesting as that is, but we went to Mars and Viking with 2 phenomenal landings in the 1970s. And then, of course, there's been a few since then, but particularly Curiosity now roving the planet on its way to Mount Sharp. We know, of course, that that's about the size of a Mini Cooper. To go beyond exploring Mars and more than just a Mini Cooper. Here are some of the challenges that we have to face. Again, we know these fairly well from a lot of the work that's been done by this community. And so, we don't have many marketing majors, but, bear with us a little bit. We're actually working on these things, and we're going to address these challenges and what we have today. So here's a quick run through 8 areas, just quickly to highlight a couple of the work that we're doing today. We are developing, flying, and testing technologies today. This is technology with a purpose. Certainly in communication, LLCD just demonstrated 622 megabits per second from the moon. We're building above that to enable deep space optical communication. Of course, propulsion is always a challenge when we explore deep space for any exploration. Both high-power solar electric as well as the ability to store cryogens is essential. Once we get to Mars as fast as we can, how do we slow down? More than a metric ton. We're at the limit of our entry, descent, and landing capability, as many of you here well know. And so we're working on inflatable technologies as well as others to enable more mass to the surface. Will it be humans or robotics? It's an and. Of course, we know that. That's an ill-posed question. And we see robotics in combination with humans for exploration. Radiation remains a significant challenge. We have new measurements now that were made on Curiosity, both on the surface and on the way to Mars. Life support is essential. Apollo 13 took 84 hours. We had to keep the crew alive for 84 hours. The crew today from station can return in hours. How do we turn that into 9 days? How do we turn that into 9 months for reliable systems? And then finally, when you're on the surface, power. And how do you get power, reliable power, efficient power on the surface? Furthermore, we want to be able to take and convert the resources. We're going to have a demonstration on the new rover, Mars 2020, to convert CO2 into oxygen. Could pave the way for saving considerable mass as we go to Mars. So this is the work we have, a quick sample of it. And of course, in all my talks, we always want to remember that it's not just the technology, but it's you, it's the people. It's the passion of the individuals. It's the passion and the talent, with both inside of the agency and outside, that really, at the end of the day, really make the difference. Mike had mentioned about having a champion. There's great work by a GW professor, Zoe Schoffenbarger, and I apologize because I always obliterate her name. She has studied technology development and fusion at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, and she looked at what does it take to get new detector technology into a mission. You know what are the things that she found? It took a champion. It actually could trace back to 2 people at Goddard over 15 years. If they weren't the champion of the detector technology, it didn't end up on a mission. So we know in technology development, besides being nonlinear and discontinuous, it takes passion. It takes champions to push it forward. And we've seen this from any of the great technology developments that the world has seen. And I know from some of you that passion in this community is very much alive. And so we need to harness that passion to come up with the great results that we have, that we need. So in closing, I'd say from a space technology perspective, we are working on a number of the technologies that we need to explore deep space. And if we can stay the course, we've been operating now for 2.5 years, appropriated with funds in fiscal year 12, so this is our second year of operation with appropriated funds. In just a few years, with success of some of the demonstrations we have planned, this equation, this discussion for NASA and the vision in the future will look considerably different. Once we get Orion and SLS up and running, once we get optical comm, the ability to store cryogenic fluid, high-power solar electric power, advanced avionics will make considerable advances in life support. This equation for what we're going to do in deep space, this discussion will look considerably different than it does today. So if we can stay the course with support and with the passion of you, we will have a wonderful future at NASA. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Well, thanks again. Thanks to all of our panelists for those fascinating and important remarks. Once again, there are folks running around with index cards. If you have a question, you could find one of them and prompt a question. I've been handed several questions to start our discussion with. Let me just start with this one first. While the panelists have talked about the importance of technology, we also need leaders willing to take a risk. The last Discovery round had 2 great missions that used ASRG technology, advanced Stirling radioisotope generators. They used ASRG technology that enabled exciting science, yet in the end, the SAFE mission was selected. Now the ASRG program has been canceled. How do we get across the valley of death? So I guess that's a very specific example, but maybe, I don't know, Mike, I don't know, maybe you want to talk about that in general with regard to the valley of death? Yeah. Just to make sure everyone's aware, the Discovery round that's mentioned here is referring to the Science Mission Directorate at NASA.
Yeah, so is this on? Yeah. So John Grunsfeld made that decision for the Science Mission Directorate, so I don't really want to speak for him, but I'll talk about that in general. Technology infusion into a mission is indeed one of the most challenging things that any technology program faces. How to remain relevant, how to show relevance. And so getting it into a competitive announcement and getting technology ready for infusion is one of the ways we think is a good way to go do that. But you think about what it takes to get a technology ready for a mission. You need the community to believe in it. You need the decision makers at headquarters to believe in it. You need to get it past the technical reviews. And so in this case, and I'm not intimately familiar with it, but whether the ASRG technology was ready to go, was ready for infusion, I think was under debate. And I certainly think that was some of the cloud that affected that decision. And that is, again, one of the challenges, and I think Mike talked about that. That is one of the challenges we have, getting the technology ready for infusion into a mission. That is hard, and there's been many historical examples of how that has worked and how it hasn't. And so, again, what we can do is do the best we can, look at those history lessons, and do the best we can to get that technology ready for a mission.
Okay. Mike or Arthi, do you want to add anything to that regarding leaders willing to take a risk, or do you want me to move on to the next question?
Some leaders are willing to take risks and others are not. You can't from below make somebody change their risk aversion posture.
Sure. Sure. Okay.
And I'll just, from a risk perspective, I think it's leaders, I think it's the culture, I think it's the organization, I think it's the community. That's a bigger question, I think. And overall is really where we are today, and getting that focus back on technology for the agency and the community, and taking the whole culture in its adaptation to risk.
Okay, great, thank you. Next question. is with regards to wants and needs. Our profession needs a future generation to carry on our work. And so the question is, what grand challenges does this panel foresee to inspire the next generation to enter the STEM educational pipeline, which could be years and years long? Anybody want to start?
Sure, I'll
Ruthie?
speak about that. You know, one thing that the robotics work that we've been doing has been mentioned a couple of times, and I frequently think of the inspiration that robotics today is for so many kids as they're going through school, and it very much reminds me of the excitement of the space program at the time when you know, my generation was young. I think these are both examples of areas that spark imaginations and make a bridge between what could feel very dry to a bunch of kids as they're learning in math and science classes. It shows them what can be possible in ways that I think are very, very powerful. And there are many other areas, and you know, I think it's important as well to have a diversity of areas because different things are going to catch different people's eyes. But in fact, I think as our agencies focus on our mission objectives, an important thing that happens that comes out of that is as we're driving for these big steps forward in capability, I think it is one of our roles is to do the things that catches the eye for the next generation and keeps that passion going.
Okay. Good. Okay. All right. Let's see. This is a question directed to you, Mike. You commented about dealing with overpromising or overselling of a program. The question would like a little more specifics for how to deal with those kinds of situations.
Well, I think there's a certain amount of self-discipline involved in understanding what your technology can realistically do, what it can realistically offer, and then promising that. I spent some of my earlier career years developing technology, and then I spent a lot more career years listening to people coming into one office or another and promising me what they were going to do. And some of it, frankly, was just not credible. I hope nothing which was not credible got through my filter, and I hope I didn't filter out too many things which were credible, but it's difficult for a manager to know the difference. So the most helpful way that can be done is if people will exercise a measure of maturity and self-discipline in assessing a given case. So let me offer an example. I worked on Hubble Space Telescope. Worked personally on Hubble Space Telescope. At that time, the people who were working in fine guidance were promising that the Hubble would deliver 7 milliarc seconds of pointing stability over a specified period against a statistical backdrop of suitable guide stars. I will tell you that meeting that challenge was very, very long in coming, and it wasn't met by any of the people who originally promised to do it. The difficulty in integrating some of those fine guidance technologies in Hubble was, in the earlier years, a principal reason for some of its delays. Now, ultimately, the Hubble was delayed by the Challenger failure, and I won't go into that, but even getting it online was delayed by that. That was instructive to me. Some years later, I was newly in the administrator's office, and the people responsible for developing James Webb Space Telescope came forward. I don't think I had sat in my chair yet, and told me that the earlier cost estimate to develop James Webb was now going to be much bigger. And then before I was out of the office, it was bigger yet again. There was a lot of overpromising and under-delivering there. Now, I think we should do James Webb almost no matter what it costs. That's not my point. My point is that if you, as a manager, can't get reasonable estimates of cost, schedule, and performance from the people who are providing it, it has an extremely damaging effect on everything else in your agency. And of course, the people who made those original promises, I hope, will never be believed again. It is the damage to our, I'll say, the social fabric of engineering and scientific development that results when those behaviors are pursued. And I'll close by saying one more time, you know, I think we should develop James Webb almost no matter what. It's just helpful if people are truthful. So across 30 years of time, from Hubble to James Webb, technology changed, behavior didn't change.
May I add on to
Sure.
Mike's comment? First of all, I think in the context of DARPA's mission, there are things that we do as we're getting close to putting a system, integrating a system and getting ready for a flight test or a launch. Everything you said certainly applies, but we do have a different mission, which is to be exploring and being willing to take the risk that goes with exploring things that are out beyond the known possible. And so, you know, to me, this whole story begins by understanding your mission, whether it is to, by God, make sure this thing happens and, you know, can't fail, versus the mission of exploring and being able to take risk in order to look for something that will lead to greater impact for the future. So in that context, in that classic DARPA context in particular, you know, being willing to take on risk doesn't mean we actually enjoy it. So we're willing to take it, but back to exactly your points, Mike, I think being completely clear-eyed about where those risks are, and being brutally frank with each other about what is working and what's not once we start down the path of a development. I think those are the factors that really allow us to still, in the end, have successful programs. And by the way, in the DARPA context, of course, success can be determining that an area isn't promising, and we should stop that and move on to the thing that is going to be much more promising. But I think the common theme across that is just not kidding ourselves, right? And I think that's the same whether you're trying to take risk and reach for the next generation or make sure the thing actually flies and succeeds.
Okay, great. One additional question. The panel has talked broadly about the importance of technology investments for a wide range of applications, but technology development means different things to different people. Could the panel speak for a moment about basic technology development versus more applied technology development, and what they think the balance or the significance should be in the federal investment within these agencies, which I take to be NASA, DARPA, and so on. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. You know, one person's technology we find is another person's engineering. Where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line between research? When does it become a technology? As many of you know, we have a technology readiness level scale we use. It's a guide. Of course, it's not perfect. We do use that to try to differentiate, though, between technology and when it becomes developed, let's say, and when it goes into more engineering and infusion and real risk into trying to solve the problem that you need to solve for a mission. In terms of, I think the balance question is a great one, and we struggle with that. I think any technology program struggles with that. It takes more money to get technology infused, to cross the valley of death, to get it into a real system. That generally means more test flights, more work, more engineering, more money. Yet it'll never compete. It'll never compete with a priority. The basic research, the early development work, the early stage ideas will never compete with that kind of work. The priority almost always goes to the mission. It's a fairly logical choice. We make it even within the program ourselves. I think the key in history has shown is a portfolio approach. You got to have both. You got to have both. You got to show you have results and you're solving problems, and at the same time do the basic research. What's the right level? We don't know. The National Research Council recommended about 10%. 10% of your whole portfolio on the basic research. Whether that's the right answer or not, I suppose, depends on where you sit, but it's the best we have.
Okay. You want to?
In the DARPA context, you know, the work that we do ranges across many different fields, many different timescales to impact. The core defining principle for anything that we do at DARPA is about reaching for off-scale impact, and that is the common element that we weigh as we look at opportunities across a very wide range of activities. And you know, really, I think after that, you have to just understand where the technology and where the applications are. So there are places where I'm really pleased with the impact that we've been able to have in recent years on the ground in Afghanistan by bringing new information tools to commanders on the ground to help them understand how the actions that they take shape the stability of local communities. Very deep information science and technology, but a very short time to impact because we were able to get, in that case, software tools, which transition sometimes more readily, directly into a problem that was at hand. On the other end of the time spectrum, work that we're doing today in understanding brain function, while it has many interesting immediate applications, for example, the ability for people to directly control sophisticated prosthetics with brain signals and new kinds of neurological interfaces that allow that to become more practical over time. Much more fundamentally, what we are learning is we're gaining research insights about how humans' brains function, how they interact with the complex information environments that we're in. And from that, I think we're going, over a period of time, I think we're going to launch into a new generation of changing how humans interact with complexity, something that I think is a common theme across many of the challenges that we're facing today. So, you know, yes, there are immediate practical applications, but really the big impact from that work is going to play out over many, many years, over decades. Absolutely, it should be part of our portfolio, again, because of the scale of the impact that's possible. So that's how we think about it, consistent with our mission at DARPA.
Great, great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, well, I want to bring this initial plenary session to a close. Before I do, I want to note that there are so many topics that we could have spoken on with this great group of panelists and our keynote speaker. There was certainly as one of the comments here that I've received says, there was certainly a heavy degree of emphasis on the space side of things here this morning. And I want to remind folks that there is an aeronautics research and development panel taking place later today, this afternoon at 2:30 in Potomac Sea. And it was for that reason that we sort of focused on space here this morning. I want to thank all of you for participating in this session, and once again, please join me in thanking the panelists and our keynote speaker, Congressman Fattah. Thank you.
Thank you.